Hey church, welcome back to my office as we continue our study through the book of Jeremiah. This week we're going to be in chapter 12, which means we've skipped a lot, and as always I encourage you to make sure that you're reading in between the studies and catching all the details. For example, we skipped chapter 11, which gives a lot of nasty details about what Jeremiah was dealing with. In fact, some of that comes up in our study today because Jeremiah is getting down. For sure, because he's dealing with an audience that's not going to listen, an audience that brings him down. And chapter 11 brings out some of the reasons he is down. And some of that is the conspiracy against him, a congregation, if you will, that speaks against him and doesn't want to follow him. And that those chapters in between give some of the reasoning. We're just hitting the highlights as we go through week by week. So, as always, I encourage you to do that reading. But today we are going to be in chapter 12, verses 1 through 13. And we start off with a question that is really a comparison. It asks us to compare or to discuss how the marriage covenant parallels the salvation covenant. Marriage is often used in the Bible in dealing with or showing us how marriage is similar to our relationship with God, or the church, making it look like, or the church relationship with God is similar to that of marriage. And rightfully so. I mean, we're called the bride of Christ often, right? And so how is that marriage covenant similar to our salvation covenant? And I would submit that in answering that, I'll give you a time to think. All right, time's up. In answering that, it's an exclusive relationship. Our salvation covenant is an exclusive relationship, just like marriage. There's only one relationship, right? It's between us and God, just like marriage is supposed to be between a man and a woman, not a whole bunch of other couples. Or between one man and a bunch of women, or one woman and a bunch of men. One relationship. And our salvation covenant is supposed to be the same way. Us with one God. And that has very clearly been broken in the book of Jeremiah. That's why God is so upset. The Israelites have moved into their promised land, the promised salvation, if you will, and they've decided they want to worship all kinds of gods and have idols. And so they have broken that covenant relationship. They've broken that salvation. The other thing I would submit that is similar is the fact that in that relationship we are to honor that other person in that covenant relationship. God has honored us in our salvation relationship by giving us free will, by giving us the salvation itself. And we are supposed to turn around and honor the one that gives us that covenant, gives us those experiences. And obviously the Israelites have not done that. And we can learn from that experience through books like Jeremiah and many, many more, obviously. And we are derelict in that if we don't give that honor and we don't have that exclusive relationship. That's why many leave the church or misunderstand the church, and quite frankly, why many leave a marriage and misunderstand marriage. So those relationships are very similar. And Jeremiah had the tough job of preaching this word. And many pastors today have the same difficult job. So let's look into verses 1 through 4 as we start with chapter 12 and just dive right into it. It says in verse 1 through 4, "You are always righteous, Lord." So this is a conversation between Jeremiah and God. In fact, this whole text is Jeremiah and God. "You are always righteous, Lord. When I bring a case before you, yet I would speak with you about justice. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all the faithless live at ease? You have planted them, and they have taken root. They grow and bear fruit. You are always on their lips, but far from their hearts. Yet you know me, Lord. You see me and test my thoughts about you. Drag them off like sheep and be butchered. Set them apart from the day of slaughter. How long will the land be parched? Will the land lie parched, and the grass in every field be withered? Because those who live in it are wicked, the animals and the birds birds have perished. Moreover, the people are saying, he will not see what happens to us. This is clearly, as I said, a conversation between Jeremiah and God. He's taken a break for just a second from the preaching to the people to say, God, I know you know what you're doing, but I need some answers. And it's not demanding answers. He just wants to know why some things are going on. And I hope you heard in just that cursory reading, it's a very common question. Why do evil people prosper? Is it just? Is it justice? Because we see it all the time in our world. You'll see a very righteous person have great loss in their family, have great heartache, and yet you'll see someone that is prospering in life, but you know they're getting that the gains in their life by doing things in an evil manner. They're stepping on other people to get those gains. So Jeremiah is just asking the question, God, why is that the case? And he does it by approaching God in verse 1 there. I would speak with you about justice. God, I have this question, and it's under the umbrella of justice. Why do all the faithless live at ease? Why are they having it easy, in other words? And it's a generalization. They don't all have it easy, just like in today's world. They don't all have it easy. But he's making the generalization that there's a lot of them, as is the case with us today. But then in verse 2, he makes kind of a duh statement. But have we thought about this? You have planted them and they have taken root. These people in our world today that prosper in their evil ways, God gave them those things. God allowed them to prosper. We like to try to find evil ways or evil things that they have done, but in the end we need to realize God has allowed that to happen, because if we don't believe that, then we don't believe in a sovereign God. It's like they snuck around and that God doesn't know it's happening. God knows it's happening, just like evil things in our world, tornadoes, tsunamis, earthquakes, hurricanes, flooding. We don't like those evil things, but if we believe in a sovereign God, then we have to believe that God allows those things to happen. Does he look to condemn us through those? Well, he has used those things in the past to judge people, but is it always a judgment? I got to say no. We just live in a sinful world, and he allows those things to happen. If we don't believe that, then we don't believe in a sovereign God that knows, sees, and has control over all things. Bring that down to talk about individuals, and we have to believe the same thing. When evil people prosper, we have to understand God sees and knows that those things are happening. So Jeremiah realizes that in verse 2. It says, you planted them. You're allowing this to happen. That's not really his question. His question comes in verse 3. You know me, Lord. I want to know how long you're going to let this go on. If it was me, this is the human part of Jeremiah that I believe is in me. Drag them off like sheep to be butchered. Set them apart for the day of slaughter. In other words, get rid of them. If it's up to me, if I was God, I'd slaughter them right now, Jeremiah says. And if we're honest with ourselves as Christians, we probably have all had at one point in time some kind of thought like this. God, don't let the evil people prosper. Instead of having a good churchy answer of, well, give me the opportunity to witness to them, give me the opportunity to go talk to them about Jesus, right? No, Jeremiah just says, God, let me put them in line to get butchered. And then he finishes with verse 4. It says, God, this is my heart. You know me. I have a just heart. How long are you going to let this go on? The land has suffered. We've had floods. We've had droughts. We've had fire burn our crops up. He's alluding to things that have happened in the past and things that will happen in the future. He's talked about him already in the book of Jeremiah, and he will talk about more later in the book of Jeremiah. And he's blaming these people and their evil ways, his own brothers and sisters that are Jews. He's saying it's their fault that we're having this. How long, God, are you going to let the land suffer? The grass is withering. The animals, and later on, verse 4, the animals and the birds have perished. How long are you going to let this go on? And then he cinches it up with the end of it. It says, moreover, the people are saying, he will not see what happens to us. His biggest issue with all this is that Jeremiah felt that the people of God were laughing at God. Go ahead, go on about your business, do what you want to. God can't see us. They were not believing in God anymore. They had gotten away with it for so long that Jeremiah felt they were making fun of God. How long, God, are you going to let them get away with it? They no longer believe in you. Jeremiah's words could be literally shared today. God, why are you letting people get away with the things you're letting them get away with? They no longer believe in you. Please come. Take them to hell right now. Get them out of our sight. We've said it many times in many places in the Bible, but the words could be spoken today, and we could be asking God the same questions. Why did the people of Jeremiah's day, and why do some think today that God wouldn't catch them? Do they think he's not a just God and doesn't see it, doesn't want to see it? Do they think he's not God at all? There's probably some along the continuum all the way. Do they think he's not all powerful, all knowing? Probably some of both. Those that aren't Christians don't really bother me with this. The ones that really bother me are the ones that claim to be Christians and still try to get away with things, thinking God won't see us. That last part where he says, he won't see what happens. What is it that makes us think that that he's always going to let us get away with it? Because at some point in time, he's going to drop the hammer and say, enough is enough. Just like he did with the people of Jeremiah's time. Then he moves on to verses 5 through 6, and he actually answers Jeremiah's question. I'd say he kind of answers it with a couple more questions. So Jeremiah's put his case before God, and now God talks to him. Verses 5 through 6, it says this: if you have raced with men on foot, and they have worn you out, how can you compete with horses? If you stumble in the safe country, how will you manage in the thickets by the Jordan? Your relatives, members of your own family, even they have betrayed you. Then they have raised you a loud cry against you. They have raised a loud cry against you. Do not trust them, though they speak well of you. So he kind of answers him, but he doesn't. And the way he answers him is by saying, you've had a rough time, but it's about to get rougher. How can you possibly run with the horses when you can't run with men? What kind of an answer is that? What God is telling him is, you've had a difficult time doing the task I've asked you to do. It's about to get more difficult. Don't worry about those that are doing evil things. Worry about the task I've given you. Try not to keep up with all the things going on. Keep up with the things I've told you to concentrate on. That's the sentiment of how can you run with horses when you can't run with men? When we get distracted with all the things going on, we lose track of what the real race is. In a horse race, that's why they put the blinders on the horse. If they didn't have those blinders on, the horses would get distracted with all the things going on around them. They have to stay focused. Jeremiah is being told by God the same thing. You can't run with all these other things going on. Run the race I've told you to run. It's going to be hard enough. In fact, it's going to get harder. He explains it a little bit further by saying the second half of that. If you stumble in the safe country or where there's not much going on, how will you handle the thickets by the Jordan? The real things that are coming down the pike, the difficulties that you're about to hear. Now, he had already been through some difficult things. I alluded to it earlier in the introduction. In chapter 11, a good chapter you need to read, there was a conspiracy to kill Jeremiah. Now, God had let him hear some of that conspiracy, so he knew when to jump out and avoid that. But it did let him know that, hey, these are supposed to be my friends, my confidant, but I can't trust them. And he goes into a little bit more detail, God does, by saying your relatives, in verse 6, members of your own family, even they have betrayed you. You can't trust people because they're going to betray you. They've already tried to kill you. Verse 6, he talks about, or chapter 6, he talks about the leaders. They've betrayed him as well. You can't trust your family. You can't trust your friends. You can't trust your leaders. Now, this isn't warning us to not trust anybody. What God is telling Jeremiah specifically is you have to be careful who you trust because you can't always trust what people say. That's true for all of us. We'd love to be able to trust everybody, but you can't. And so, in the context of what Jeremiah was asking God about the evildoers and them gaining profit from their evil ways, God is telling him basically, don't always trust what you see. Don't always think you know all the details. I've got this handled. Run the race that I've given you to handle, and don't worry about those things. You know, it's not always a good thing when you hear good things. It's not always a bad thing when you hear bad things. In fact, your Sunday school lesson asks a question, and I want to read it specifically how it is because I want you to think about it for just a second. It says, what is the danger of basing our faithfulness to God on the response of others? All right, so that's the warning that Jeremiah was being given by God about not trusting certain people. So again, what is the danger of basing our faithfulness to God on the response of others? So, speaking from the preacher position, if I base my faithfulness to preach and to teach on your response, what's the danger in that? So, if I have a really great Sunday, and I mean the house is packed, let's say we got 300 or 400 people in here, that would be a great day, right? And 50 of those came forward. We had a great response. What's the danger in that? If I base my faithfulness on that response. The danger in that is that I'm going to say, wow, I must be doing a good job. Look at me. And I gain some kind of confidence or arrogance in my ability rather than what God's doing. Well, what's the negative in that? Or what's the negative in if we don't have people? We got 30 people in, and we don't have any response. Well, then I can't take any confidence in what I'm doing, but just the opposite happens. Well, I must be doing something wrong. It must be my preaching, it must be my teaching. And it could be, but it may not be. I may be being completely faithful to His Word, and it's just not the timing. It's not going to be my privilege to be here when there is a response. It's my job to keep the doors open until there is a response. Our faithfulness has to be to God, for God, in everything. It can't be. Now, do I appreciate the nice words? Sure. The encouraging words? Absolutely. Do I appreciate the honesty of people of, wow, Grant, that wasn't your best shot? Oh, absolutely. In fact, honesty is usually the best. Brutal honesty, yeah, you can keep that. But honesty is usually the best because it gives the power back in God's hands. Not that we ever took it out of his hands, but it gives the power back in God's hands, and it keeps us from getting full of ourselves or down on ourselves when things aren't going right. It balances out where God wants us to be balanced. Jeremiah was having a hard time with this throughout this book because they weren't responding. They were conspiring to kill him. And even when he gave great messages, nothing. No turning back to God. He had to feel that he wasn't doing something right, when in fact he was doing exactly what God called him to do. And people were still turning away. God goes on with an explanation. He's still speaking to Jeremiah and talking about what he was going to do, reminding Jeremiah that no matter what he preached, he still had a plan. And this is what his plan was, verses 7 through 13. It says, I will forsake my house, abandon my inheritance. I will give the one I love into the hands of the enemies. My inheritance has become to me like a lion in the forest. She roars at me, therefore I hate her, Has not my inheritance become to me like a speckled bird of prey? That other bird of prey surround and attack. Go and gather all the wild beasts, bring them to devour. Many shepherds will ruin my vineyard, and trample down my field. They will turn my pleasant fields into a desolate wasteland. It will be made a wasteland, parched and desolate before me. The whole land will be laid waste, because there is no one who cares. Over all the barren heights and the desert, destroyers will swarm. For the sword of the Lord will devour from one end of the land to the other. No one will be safe. They will sow wheat, but reap thorns. They will wear themselves out, but gain nothing. They will bear the shame of the harvest because of the Lord's fierce anger. At the very beginning of this, he says three things that in the NIV, it makes it sound like it's future tense. In the other versions, it sounds like it's perfect tense. And in fact, it's what a lot of commentators call a prophetic perfect. You might say a future perfect. NIV makes it sound like it's the future. NASB, King James, makes it sound like it's past tense. They're both right in the fact that it's perfect in the fact that it's completed. It's future in the fact that it is prophetic and it's going to happen. So you could read it like this in verse 7. I have forsaken my house, and it's going to be done in the future. But I've already made that decision. It's going to happen. I have abandoned my inheritance. It's going to happen, but the decision's already been made. I have given my one love into the hands of my enemies, and it will happen. So the decision's been made. You can't change my mind. We learned that last week. You can't change my mind. Don't even bother praying for him. But it's something that's about to happen when you go into exile. So kind of remember that phrase, prophetic past. They all, my house could relate to temple, but given the context, all of these probably relate to the fact that he's talking about his people. My house, my one love, my inheritance, it's all God lamenting over the fact that he's given up his people. They've done something that's hurt my heart so bad, I'm giving them up. My inheritance, in verse 8, has become to me like a lion in the forest. They've come up against me, and they've attacked me. They've challenged me like a lion would, and roars against me. And it says in verse 8, therefore I hate, not hate in terms of I never loved them, but I have to put them down. It's the just thing to do. You can't challenge God and not be challenged back. You can't go up against God and think you're going to get away with it. Has not my inheritance become to me like a speckled bird? Now, some of your versions will say hyena. I couldn't reconcile hyena and speckled bird, so I did some research, and there's actually a laughing hyena bird or a laughing speckled bird, and that's why some versions have that. It's not the hyena, the thing that looks like a dog, but there's actually a bird called that. So they're both correct. And I think it's even more ironic that it's called a laughing speckled bird. It's like God is saying, my people have come like I'm a laughing stock. They're laughing, making fun of me. I can't have that challenge and not do something about it. I have to justify, I have to go against this, or I'm not a just God, in other words. And that's even more solidified by the fact at the end of verse 9 where he says, go and gather up all the wild beasts or all the nations and devour them. You can't challenge me without having a reaction. It's kind of like in Paul in the New Testament. If he just hadn't said that he wanted to go before Caesar, once you make that statement, you have to do it. If they just hadn't gone up before God, he wouldn't have had to do this. But once you challenge God, I have to do this. So bring the nations against them. And then in verse 10 and 11, he talks about the other thing that has happened. The shepherds, the people in charge, the priests, the clan leaders, all the people that are in control, they've taken this land and they've devoured it. They've made it a wasteland. They've made it desolate. The word desolate comes in many different forms throughout verses 10 and 11. They've taken this promised land and they've made it unpleasant. They've made it a wasteland, this beautiful gift. Not only have you come up against me, but you took my gift and you threw it away. And because of that, there's going to be a sword against you. These nations are going to come. In verse 12, these nations are going to come against you and devour you from one end to the other. There's not going to be anything left behind. It's going to be a complete destruction, God says. And then verse 13, he says, all your hard work is going to actually come, and it's going to be, instead of being something you're proud of, it's going to be a shame. You're going to sow wheat, but you're going to come out with thorns. Your hard work's going to turn into nothing. In fact, you're going to work and work and work, and you're not going to have any profit whatsoever. In fact, the work that you put in verse 13, is going to turn out to be your actual shame. The thing that, especially for guys, we pride ourselves in our work. We're proud of our jobs. We're proud of the things that we have become. Your work is actually going to be now your downfall. You've taken my free gift and you've destroyed it. Well, now work your entire life and you're going to be ashamed of it. This is what God says is now your reward. This shows us how serious God is about his discipline of his people. Does he still love his people? Absolutely. But you can't go up against God and expect not to have something go wrong. You can't kill somebody in our nation and expect to get away with it. Now, does it happen? Sure. There's lots of things happening in our world today where people get away with things they shouldn't. But theoretically, you kill somebody, you go to jail. Up against God, whose justice is perfect, whose law is perfect, you go up against God, you're going to get disciplined. If he didn't have that justice system, then he wouldn't be a perfect God. I don't understand why some people believe you can get away with things with God. At the very beginning, Jeremiah said, God, how long are you going to let this happen? They don't believe that you see what's happening. God says they're going to get their discipline. They're not getting away with it. I'll take care of it. Jeremiah had to be told this a few times. We need to be reminded of it. But know this, God sees everything, knows everything, and justice will be served in his time. Let me pray for us. Father in heaven, I thank you for your word. I thank you for the encouragement that you give us through your word. Help us be mindful of the fact that we need to be serving you while we serve others. We're serving them because we love you. We're not serving them just because we love people, but because we love you. Help us keep our blinders on and stay focused on the task that you've given us and never lose sight of that. And I pray this in the mighty name of Christ. Amen. Folks, I pray that you've had a blessed week and that we can see you at church. Don't forget, we got VBS coming up. I hope that you're here for that as well. Tell everybody about it. We have it starting on Monday, the 26th, and it starts at 6 o'clock in the evening. Hope to see you here. Come and help. Come and bring your kids. We'd love to have everybody here. God bless you. See you soon. Bye-bye.